My name is Max Pensky. I'm one of the two co-directors of the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention here at Binghamton University at the State University of New York. And I'm delighted to welcome our guest, our resident practitioner, Waheed Ahmad. Waheed has been with us on and off for almost 2 years now, while also doing many, many other things. And he's here for a visit now in October of 2023, and we're delighted to have him. Welcome, Waheed.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Great. We have so much to talk about, but I just want to sort of bring us right into the sort of work that you're doing right now. You are a former government official in the Ghani Democratic Administration in Afghanistan until you were forced to flee with many, many other people in the Taliban takeover in August of 2021. And since then, you've made it first to Ukraine and then now finally to the United States, where you've been doing a great deal of work trying to help document abuses by the Taliban and also work with the Afghan diaspora. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you've been doing in the past couple of years, and what of that work has really stood out to you as being particularly interesting or important for you?
Yeah. So in the aftermath of the collapse, there were so many of friends and colleagues that were at risk in Afghanistan, and a number of our friends and former colleagues, we thought that it's a good idea to actively document these atrocities as the Taliban committed. As the Taliban as a de facto governing authorities of Afghanistan, govern Afghanistan with no legal framework. There is no constitution, so no accountability mechanism, and almost everyone throughout the world, every major important international actor doesn't recognize them officially. So within that vacuum of oversight, the Taliban has committed systematic atrocities and human rights violations against different groups of the population, particularly those who worked with the Afghan government, or they were part of the Afghanistan National Defense and Security Forces. They have also enacted a harsh policy that some activists call as gender prosecution, where they systematically deny Afghan women their basic rights for education, employment, and freedom of movement. So with all this, it would, in the past 2 years, it been very important to look at these atrocities, make sense of them, document them as much as possible. But obviously there were limitations to what we did. And it's so hard to get access on the ground under these harsh group, that operates there. And also, documentation work, as you know, is very important and requires a lot of resources, both technical resources and as well as other expertise, legal aspects, the technical aspects, and all. So it has been going, and mostly the work that we did was focused on advocacy and having conversations about what's happening there and trying to make up with the right terms. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. And so I wanted to circle back because you had organized a really terrific webinar yesterday on this idea of gender persecution by the Taliban, which is shocking. And during the webinar, some of your experts really got into a very interesting conversation about what to call it. I mean, persecution is certainly a term that we use that has a sort of a seat or a home in international treaty law. It's one of the components that can be used to define a crime against humanity. But a number of your colleagues were talking about beginning to describe the Taliban's treatment of women as a form of gender apartheid. And they made I think the very plausible claim that the gender apartheid experienced by women in contemporary Taliban Afghanistan is in many ways more severe, more systematic, and more damaging than the system of racial apartheid in South Africa. What do you think about that? I mean, is it just a change in words, or do you think that it signals a sort of a different kind of approach toward global attention?
Well, I think based on the ideological infrastructure the Taliban has, it's in their, group's identity to have these harsh policies against women and to oppress women, and to do that in a very systematic way. I think, personally, I think it meets the criteria of a gender apartheid. The situation of women in Afghanistan meets, that criteria. And I also understand that the Taliban leadership will not compromise on that, because it's an existential need of the group to remain this way, to not compromise on this issue, and also on other harsh policies that they have. But they've been particularly focused and have allocated a lot of resources and energy and time in restricting all aspects of women's life in Afghanistan. I think it would be important for the international community and all relevant actors to recognize this as a gender apartheid. So then it would be easier to put this in perspective, and then also compare it with other instances globally where other countries have similar situations. So my hope is that most of these scholars and activists, as well as international actors, try to basically come up with a term, or accept this term, or recognize the situation of women in Afghanistan as gender apartheid.
Thank you. So a lot of your own work has been participating in efforts, as we just discussed, to document really violent international crimes either committed by the Taliban or at least tolerated by the Taliban. They've been quite ruthless in targeted killings, tortures, and kidnappings of anyone they suspect of having been part of the previous democratic government, or for that matter, anyone that they suspect of being a potential threat to their regime. Have you, and some of the documented targeted killings and torture, especially that you've been able to document, are quite horrific. Have you noticed any, I know it's only been a little bit more than 2 years, but have you noticed any change in the Taliban's conduct here? Are they expanding their range of enemies? Is there any change, greater or lesser, in the number of people that they're targeting?
I think here it's important to talk about Taliban's tactics and strategy for target selection. So who becomes a target, should meet a number of criteria according to the Taliban's ideology or ideological infrastructure that I mentioned earlier. Based on a 500-page manifesto that the Chief Justice has published, there is a part in the manifesto that he justifies the killing of anyone that poses threat to their Islamic State. So they justified that as doing something in the greater good of the society. So in order to maintain this Islamic system that they claim, it's absolutely right, according to them, to go after anyone who can pose a threat to their rule. And they see women in particular, because they have been protesting on the ground, and they have been opposing the Taliban and asking them for accountability. And then also another group that fits this criteria is the former Afghanistan Defense and Security Forces. They are afraid that these individuals who have received training and have been, part of the government, they have the potential to be mobilized. And then they have the potential to be able to, contribute to security and governance in a post-Taliban setting. Therefore, in a very systematic way, they have been targeting these individuals. UN has documented and released reports on that. The New York Times did a report about 500 former Afghan security forces that were killed by the Taliban. And this trend is going on still. I see reports from individuals. I see reports on social media about former ANDSF security forces being killed, here and there in Afghanistan. They're arrested with no reason, and then there is no due process. The families don't know where they are. The UN doesn't have access to inspect some of these prisons that the Taliban run. And it's very concerning, and I don't think anything has changed. I think they still have the same policy, despite the fact that their leader announced the policy of the policy of general amnesty. Despite that, they have been, targeting people in a very, very systematic way.
And in terms of the Hazara ethnic group, here we have a group that falls under the definition of a protected group in the Genocide Convention. They too have been targeted. Tell us about that.
So in this new environment where there's a vacuum of governance and security, the risk for for the Hazara community, the risk environment has been transformed. The Taliban, as the new governing authority, are very indifferent, at best, very indifferent at protecting this community or providing enough resources and equipment to them for them to be able to protect themselves. And at worst, there are certain groups of the Taliban that are very anti, they have no sympathy for a community like Hazara in Afghanistan. Even before the Taliban took control of Afghanistan, there was the Hazara community has been systematically targeted. Their educational centers, their hospitals, their community centers, their mosques have been targeted with bombings, and so many of them, including men, elderly, women, children, have lost their life. And I don't think the Taliban are capable governors to provide that kind of security and protection for this community.
I mean, let me follow up on that point, because I mean, you and I have talked about this a lot, and it's something that we read a lot. When we analyze the Taliban, it's that they don't seem to be competent to administer governance in an entire country, especially one as large and diverse as Afghanistan. But by some accounts, they don't seem to care particularly about what you and I would call fragility, which is to say, not just state violence and international atrocity crimes, but the basic provision of services, the basic provision of security, the basic provision of healthcare, roads and bridges, all the sort of things, the humdrum things that national governments are supposed to provide. I know that you're working very intensively now on this the sort of a more comparative approach to state fragility, and so walk us through, if you will, what does it mean in this context to talk about Afghanistan under the Taliban as a fragile state, and what makes Afghanistan's, if anything does, what makes Afghanistan's fragility so different from a fragile state that doesn't have such a peculiar, remarkable ideological group in control?
Well, as you know, every instance of fragility is different, but overall the context of fragility is similar. In Afghanistan, I mean, I remember when I was, a child and going to school, I remember that I was living in a society without a state. The different areas that, that I had to go, for example, I had to go to school, I had to go to the market, I had to go home, right? All these different areas within a few kilometers, they were controlled by different militia commanders. So each of these militias had the monopoly over the use of violence in their own designated territory. And Afghanistan was a fragile country with no state. Then with what happened in post 9/11, we started the state in Afghanistan, and then the country had a government. The country had its first democratic constitution in 2004. So we thought at some point that this vicious cycle of violence has ended for Afghanistan. But obviously, if we are not able to address the root causes of fragility and address the drivers of violence, then society's status will remain fragile, and then we have to see, watch the same movie again and again and again, just like in the case of Afghanistan. I mean, in my lifetime, I have seen at least, with the last collapse, I have seen at least, 3 collapses of authorities in Afghanistan. So what can we do to address this issue? And based on the research that has been done in the area of fragility, the number one issues that countries, the mixed countries, fragile, or the existence of weak political institutions. And obviously, in the case of the Taliban, I don't think there are political institutions, because political institutions should come from something, right? They should be legitimized, they should have legitimacy. But in this case, it's an insurgent group that took power, men with Kalashnikovs trying to govern. And then most of the provision of these basic needs services are provided by NGOs, by aid from international community, the US in particular, that provides health services, runs clinics, hospitals. The Taliban, I don't think, is capable of governing or providing governance. I don't think they have the expertise. I don't think they have the legitimacy, and I don't think they know what are some of these issues, socio-economic, socio-political issues that Afghanistan are facing. So and I don't think, I think they also, the Taliban themselves, they realize that they will be here temporarily. We have seen signs of that. You see that they're high-ranking, commanders are like buying houses, buying, fancy cars, marrying another wife, getting another wife, and we have seen those instances from top-level Taliban commanders in Afghanistan after their takeover. So they also know that they cannot, last very longer, just simply because they don't know how to govern. Then they know nothing about governance or service delivery or reform or intimidation is not governance. There can be peace anywhere. Like you can find peace in graveyard too, but then obviously if the Taliban decides to kill everyone in the society, then there is peace, intimidate everyone, but that's not sustainable. It's not going to work for a long time.
Thank you. Let me take you back to one point you made that was, I thought, a really important point. You said that and I agree with you, that at heart, the driver for political fragility is the weakness of political institutions. Obviously the United States spent 20 years, trillions of dollars, and unknown thousands of lives, American lives, but Afghan lives, trying to build a nation build in Afghanistan. It was a failure. And this is a huge question. It's been answered over and over again, but I'd love to hear the way that you think about it. Must it have failed? Was there an opportunity for those political institutions to have been put on a firm foundation that was missed? Was there some part of the American policy that was so obviously wrong in hindsight now that it could only have led to instability? I mean, I think that I hope that America's nation building period is behind us now. But when you look back at the 20 years of efforts, what strikes you as the obvious thing that could have been different?
If you build a wall on a foundation that's crooked, the wall cannot be sustainable, no matter how much you invest in the wall, if the foundation is not right. I think in the case of Afghanistan, that was the mistake that the international community made. Instead of, thinking and then consulting different parts of Afghanistan in what is the best form of government or best form of institutions that would be aligned with the realities of the society of Afghanistan, with the realities of the diversity of Afghanistan. They sort of rushed into adopting a system that has never worked in the history of Afghanistan, which is the centralized government, where power, where it makes power a zero-sum game. So one person who is the president of Afghanistan wins, and then every other political actor in the country is a loser. In an environment like that, it's very hard to maintain peace. It's hard. I mean, it's possible. It's possible to maintain peace, but it will be too expensive, both in treasure and in blood, to do that. Since its inception, throughout Afghanistan's history, starting from 1747 to now, the only person who could centralize the Afghan state and then and was effective at it was the Iron Amir, who Abdurrahman Khan, who had a nickname of the Iron Amir. He was a very violent man, and based on his own account, he has killed around 100,000 Afghans to be able to do that. So we know from this that if we want to impose a centralized system on Afghanistan, first, it doesn't work. If we impose it, then it's very expensive. Abdurrahman Khan received subsidy, aid from the British India, and he had an army, and then he was also a very violent man, and he achieved it, but at what cost? By killing so many Afghans, and then obviously it worked until the reign of his grandson. Things fall apart again, and so I think the international community in 2001 should have reflected on those past lessons from Afghanistan's history, and then should have consulted with different groups, including the Taliban, to form a system of government, a state that is acceptable to all political actors and that is aligned with the realities of the society, and is like power and competition and capital is not concentrated in Kabul, but the regions also, it's distributed equally to different regions of Afghanistan.
Thank you. Well, I would love to thank you very much for talking with us today, and it's great to have you back with us. I'm hoping very much that you'll be a regular.
Thank you so much.
Regular visitor here in Binghamton at I-GMAP.
I will be.
And very best of luck in the next phase of your professional career.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.